Remembrance Gardena.
Yay.
Let's hear it for the South Bay. My roots are in Altadena, California, and I live in Pasadena. So we've been through hell and back, but I think there's something about the spirit, right, of places like Gardena that will sustain us. I have the pleasure of having a brief interview with our treasurer, oral historian Art Hansen. So I'm just gonna jump right into it. Through the Nichi Bei Foundation, they recently released this book, which is available for purchase down there, and Nikkei Harvest, which is a collection of arts, book reviews of many things pertaining to Japanese American history and experience. So Art, I was familiar with you, I got to know you through the book Manzanar Martyr, which centered on Manzanar mess hall worker Harry Ueno, which came out in 1986 with the Cal State Fullerton Oral History Program. Your name was on the byline, as well as our dear Sue Kunitomi Embry, and this other woman, Betty E. Mitson. And I believe Betty, who was an undergraduate at the time, was the one who opened the door for you to enter into Japanese American history. Is that correct?
Well, pretty correct. I started to do Japanese American history before that, but Betty Mitson was the one that urged me to start a project in the oral history program at Cal State Fullerton called the Japanese American Project, which became quite famous because of all the interviews we did. And I never took any lessons on how to do an oral history interview, but Betty Mitson had taken the course at Cal State Fullerton, which had a big oral history program. She took a course, and so she taught me how to do oral history interviewing. So I got started doing interviewing because of Betty. And then Betty got the project started. So in a lot of ways I was beholden to. She was my graduate student, my graduate assistant. And their son Brian was in the same class with Betty. So I got to know that family pretty well. And so I owe an awful lot to Betty Mitson for what she did to get me mobilized.
One time I was at a book festival, and there was a white guy who had written a best-selling book about a Japanese character, and someone asked, "When's your next book?" And he says, "Well, I'm over this Japanese phase, so I'm going to do something else." By the way, he never produced another book. With Art, what made you continue and devote your whole professional life, and the big deal, I guess, of your personal life to Japanese Americans?
Well, a couple of things. In 1960, I was a senior at UC Santa Barbara, and I took a course called Minority Group Relations. I had gone to school with Sansei, so I was not unfamiliar with Japanese Americans, although none of them talked about their camp experiences whatsoever. And I took this course, and the professor was a visiting professor named Charlotte Zimmerman. She came from Harvard to teach this course. And Tomatsu Shibatani was in his sociology department at UC Santa Barbara, but I didn't know anything about him at the time, or I'd have interviewed him. But anyway, she gave us a chance to write a term paper on some topic, and she named a couple of topics, and one of them was the World War II, incarceration experience. So she didn't use the word incarceration, she used internment experience of Japanese Americans. So I said, I think I'll do that. So I did it, and I wrote a horrible paper. The kind of research you do when you're in a class like that is, Time Magazine, Newsweek, Life, Reader's Digest and stuff like that. And at that time, the big interest was passing the Japanese Americans off to the American public as the model minority. And so all of the articles had titles like A Blessing in Disguise. It was a blessing in disguise because the incarceration got these people out of their Japan towns, and it got them out into, later on through resettlement, out into the general society across the United States. And when they were in camp, they got to be the cheerleaders, and they got to be the quarterbacks, things that they didn't do in the public schools and stuff. Well, I wrote my paper. Guess what I titled it? Blessing in Disguise. Okay, so I had to live that down. And my field of study was Anglo-American intellectual history. And I wrote my dissertation on that topic in that field. And when I finished my dissertation, I knew I wanted to get back to something to do with Japanese Americans. So I taught 2 seminars, and they were on historical writing. But the assignment I made to everybody in the class is they had to write an essay about an original research paper on something to do with the Japanese American World War II incarceration experience. And so I had 25 in each class, so all of a sudden I had 50 papers. Then after that, I started taking people up to Manzanar every year. Took the whole class up there, and Sue Embry would come with us, and Wilbur Sato came with us, and Mary Nomura, songbird of Manzanar, and Shai Nomura would come with us, and we'd stay in this place up at Lone Pine, the Willow Motel, which was made up of old barracks from the Manzanar camp. And so I was just so far into it. I mean, I was so far into it that, I like to say, my first wife and I, who I was married to for 15 years, my first wife and I mainly got divorced because we were both having affairs. But the affairs there was no affair that I was having that could match the affair that I was having doing Japanese American history. I was a maniac. It was my full-time occupation. I went all over the country interviewing people. I spent all of my time basically putting together the project, getting my students involved with the Japanese American project. I mean, it was my lifeblood at that time. So in any event, that really got me into it, and then I started doing the kind of work. The first time I met you, Naomi, in person was when Darcy Iki brought you over to Cal State Fullerton, and that was because Darcy had put out a book that you had authored in 2 books that you did, and I remember you looked at me as if to say, "What the hell is this white guy going to tell me?" Anyway, so we had a great relationship that was forged at that particular time. So and Naomi has been a force in my life ever since. I've read everything she's written. I loved it. I love that she became such a success. I remember when all of her books were a success, whether they were fictional or non-fictional, whether they were done by a university press, whether they were done by a private press, whatever. They've all been fantastic. I remember particularly when you worked for the book on the flower market, and I went over to the initiation, and I wrote something, an appreciation for that book and stuff. And
wait a minute. Art, this is about you.
I know.
Well, which kind of reflects, like, even this book where you're highlighting the work of so many other people who study Japanese American history. So about how many interviews do you think you've done?
Well, as I said at Janum, I wasn't like Wilt Chamberlain, where he counted the number of sex events he had. So he had it over 100. Mine's well over 100, probably close to 200. I did interviews not only for Cal State Fullerton's Oral History Program, but the Japanese American National Museum, and for many other institutions that would ask me to do interviews for them. So probably about 200 oral history interviews altogether. A lot of them were multi-day oral history. Sometimes I have 3 different sessions with the person, so there were a lot of hours of interviews. So yeah, I did a lot of interviews.
Anyone who has either been interviewed or has a relative or friend interviewed by Art Hansen, can you raise your hand? So thank you so much, Art. I'm just curious in terms of the art of oral histories. I mean, during your course, in this work.
I like that, the art of oral history.
Art, yeah, art. And one of my characters is named Art, too.
Thank you.
Art, so over the years, have you noticed, like academia, how does academia view oral history, and have you seen that kind of change over the years?
When I went into the field of Japanese American studies, Japanese American studies was a very low profile sort of venture, and so was oral history. Oral history as a a disciplined activity, was just starting. I was in the ground floor with the Oral History Association, which I later became the president for, and I was the editor for the Oral History Review, which was the journal of record for oral history in the United States. Those were nothing, but now they're both big. Oral history is huge. Everybody practices oral histories. There are all kinds of regional oral history organizations and the like, and of course Japanese American study. This is what's amazing. When I first got into oral history and Japanese American studies, the Japanese American community was the largest Asian American community in the United States. It's now one of the smallest. And yet, this book would not have been possible. That's okay, I drop things now all the time. This book wouldn't have been possible, except that so much work is done on Japanese American history. And unfortunately, a lot of the reason that they write about it is because of 9066, for God's sake, and the camps. The camps has made, Japanese Americans famous, etc. But all these books keep coming out, and I'm so pleased that I had a chance through Kenji Naguma to be able to write book reviews for the Nichi Bei. It used to be called the Nichi Bei Weekly, now it's called the Nichi Bei News. But I love writing book reviews for him, and I would write 3 or 4 or whatever amount, and Kenji always gave me the choice of which ones I wanted to interview, and I was very anxious to interview him, and I just enjoy it. It's kept me alive, literally, in recent years. It's kept me alive since I've had a heart attack and cancer and other things, and mostly I would be just worrying about if I had a bowel movement, for God's sake. But I get a chance to write book reviews, and I do spend about 5 hours every day at the computer, and I've got 2 new books that are going to be coming out shortly. So, and since my heart attack in 2017, I've had 6 books out, and so it's been a real boon to me in a certain way. Been a really incentive to get the job done, to become a Naomi Hirahara. Never leave a year go by without getting a book out. Okay.
So those of you who are thinking about writing a book, you have no excuse, okay? Are just looking at the types of books, history books that are coming out about Japanese Americans, what kind of book would you like to see? What do you think is new ground that you would like to see encapsulated in some kind of investigative work?
I don't know. Actually, I'm really pleased with what's happened. I was one of the first people to start talking about Japanese American resistance. I mean, the book you mentioned, Manson, Our Martyr, and everything. For me, I thought it was a bunch of bullshit when people said that all Japanese Americans just cooperated with their incarceration. I knew better. The first article I wrote was on the Manzanar riot. I mean, that's the very first article I ever wrote, and it became a signature article, and it was in the Amerasia Journal. And I was very proud. David Hacker and I wrote that article. David Hacker was one of my graduate students, and we wrote that thing. And so for me, that's what I was interested in. I was interested in all of the dissonance, all of the kickback that happened in the camps. And so now that's a big study. Resistance is a huge part of the Japanese American, book. So I'm not thinking about, I can tell you about the books that I'm working on. The one that's coming out first is a book that deals with the first year that the Manzanar camp was in existence. And it's based on the diary of Robert Brown, and Robert Brown became the assistant director at Manzanar. but he started out as a public relations person at Manzanar, and he was involved with Manzanar from the ground floor. And he kept the diary of 1942. And I found out about this diary because somebody told me the guy you need to talk to is about Manzanar is Bob Brown, and Bob Brown lives in your neck of the woods in Orange County. And he lived in Laguna Niguel, and he lived at Leisure World, which a senior living place, which my students used to call Seizure World. You know. Anyway, I went down and I interviewed him, and when we had such a good interview that he said, "Listen, come out to the carport here. I got something that I want to give you." And he gave me the 5-volume history of Manzanar that he wrote with Ralph Merritt. He handed to me the 5 volumes of it. And then later on, when we were talking about things, he said, "You know, I kept a diary in 1942." And I said, "You kept a diary? I'd like to see that diary. So could I borrow that?" So he let me borrow it and stuff. And so, you know, I read that diary, and I went back to him and I said, "You know, Bob, here's a proposition I want to make. I would like to edit this diary for publication." So he was amenable to it. And we worked on it for about a year, and then he had a heart attack and he died before it was finished. And then his widow contacted me, and I was about to leave to do a year of teaching up at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And I didn't have time to Xerox the diary. And so I sent her the diary, the original diary. And then when I got back from San Luis Obispo at the end of the year, I contacted her and I said, "You know, I'd like to get that diary back and what we were working on." Because what we would do was I would send him questions and he would provide answers to the questions, and it became quite voluminous, a book-sized sort of thing. And so I'd like to get that back. And she said, "I don't know how I can tell you this, Art, but I've lost it. I can't find it." I said, "Oh no," and everything. She said, "But I want to make it up to you. So if you'll come out here," she said, "you and your wife, Debbie, you come out here for dinner, and I'll take you to a nice place." And she did, Quiet Canyon. It was a place out in Dana Point. And we went to that restaurant, and we came back to the house, and she said, "I want to give you a few things." She gave me a copy of a book that Ansel Adams, Born Free and Equal, that he had written on Manzanar, with these great photographs that Ansel Adams takes and everything. And then she also gave me a few other things that related to Bob that were important. But, you know, I still didn't have the diary. But then, here's what happened. 35 years later, the daughter of Bob Brown walks into the Manzanar site, to the museum, and Rose Masters, who was a ranger up there in charge of their oral history program, says, "I would like to interview you, Susan Brown, about your father, Bob Brown." And so, and then after they interviewed, she said, "You know, my friend Art Hansen was doing something with your father, and then the mother lost the thing." She said, "Well, when my stepmother died, she sent me some stuff, and let me look through that stuff." And then she got back with me and she said, "I think the thing that I have here is the very thing that you're looking for. It's that diary that you did." You know, and so she sent it to me. So that's what I prepared for publication.
That is an incredible story.
Yeah, and the end part of it, basically, at the end, that I had to come down pretty hard on Bob Brown and the newspaper up there, because here was the situation at every one of the camps that they had, the 10 camps. The whole story was the same. The local newspaper and the public affairs people, basically all they did care about was what these people in the camps could do in the way of providing labor to improve their communities. What kind of work that they could do. But they never cared anything about the loss of civil liberties and civil rights and all the other deprivations that the people in the camps had. So in the end, that's what I write about. But I do say one nice thing about Bob Brown, and that is that Morris Opler, who was a famous anthropologist that I interviewed, Morris Opler had said in the thing that Bob Brown, he said, was a lightweight. He said he was a lightweight, he was a know-nothing. All he cared about was the local community. And I said, in my thing, I said, well, that's not totally correct. He was not an intellectual lightweight. He was quite well aware of world affairs and domestic affairs and politics and everything else. And he was well read. He was interested in the arts. He was interested in the sciences. I said he was a pretty bright guy, so I did put a footnote in there, and it was a quote from Sue Kunitomi Embry, who was my dearest friend. And Sue had worked for Bob Brown. Bob Brown was in charge of the so-called, Manzanar Free Press. It wasn't really a free press. Every copy of it was reviewed before it got out. But the Manzanar Free Press, but she worked for him, and she had such nice things to say about Bob Brown and how caring he was of everybody else. So I was able to put that in there, which salved my conscience a lot. So Sue helped me very much on that. She continued to help me after my death. And Sue Embry was the first person that I ever interviewed. In 1973, the very first person. What a great first person, a news person. And then the second person was Togo Tanaka, another news person from the Rafu Shimpo. And so,
I think they're trying to
get us out of here. Okay.
But you know what? It comes off full circle, right?
Yeah.
Full circle. Well, thank you so much for all your dedication and work. How long are you going to be here today?
I'm not very long.
Oh, okay. So, but
I'm out of here.
but get his book. It's being sold, and I have copies of my book, a couple of my books too. But we have a very special.
We have a film festival.
No, but before we have the film festival, we have a representative from Assemblyman Al, excuse me. I'm saying art so much. So why don't you do the introductions, Nichi? Muratsuchi-san.
Just don't ask me to stand up.
So I guess we'll start with Chloe Tachibana. You can come up there. And then what do you do next?
Hello, happy Sunday everyone. Hi Arthur. My name is Chloe Tachibana. I'm here on behalf of California State Assemblymember Al Muratsuchi, who is based here in the South Bay in lovely Gardena. Our district office is in Torrance. So thank you so much for coming to the South Bay.
It's the next best thing to having Warren Foratani.
There you go. But yeah, on behalf of the Japanese American community, South Bay has such a huge Japanese American community, and the Assembly members also chair of the Education Committee on the Assembly, and so education is a huge part of our office, and especially making sure that Japanese American storytelling is continuing to be told, and that we have people like Arthur out there that are able to tell these stories and are advocating and creating this space for us. So I want to present the Certificate of Recognition. In recognition and celebration of your remarkable contributions as former senior historian for the Japanese American National Museum, Emeritus Professor of History and Asian American Studies at California State University Fullerton, and your leadership on the Nichi Bei Foundation Advisory Council, and with its sincere appreciation for your outstanding contributions and dedication to the Japanese American historical legacy. We thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to call Koji Laozawa, the Nichi Bei Foundation Board, to present a couple of words.
So I'm here to present to you on behalf of the Board of Supervisors from the City and County of San Francisco in recognition of your distinguished career as Emeritus Professor of History and Asian American Studies at California State Fullerton from 1966 to 2008 for documenting Japanese American resistance to their unjust oppression by the United States government during World War II, and for 15 years of insightful book reviews and Nichi Bei News. The City and County of San Francisco extend our highest commendation. Thank you for your lifetime of contributions to preserving and honoring the Japanese American historical legacy.
why we're giving you some San Francisco commendations is because we had a Nichi Bei Book Fest last July, and unfortunately, Art was not able to make it because he was stricken with COVID the week on a cruise, I think, right?
No, I got COVID, my wife got COVID, and then my wife fell down in the backyard and fractured her right shoulder. So we weren't able to come up for that. I'm sorry I missed it, but it was a great event.
Okay, and now this is something for us, from us.
From the Nichi Bei Foundation, we honor Nichi Bei News contributing writer Arthur A. Hansen on his lifetime of dedication and contributions to Japanese American history and his commitment to historical accuracy. From the Nichi Bei Foundation.
I know I'm dragging this out, but I just want to say one more thing. Everybody's giving me this commendation and this thanks. What I'd like to do is give my commendation and thanks to the Japanese American community. It's the most wonderful community to work for. I've just been blessed to have been part of this community. I mean, to allow me into your, enfold me into your love and your support. It's meant the world to me. It really has. And as far as this guy over here, he's done, this kid, he's done so much for not only me, but for the Japanese American community. I mean, this guy gets 1 hour of sleep a night, and he has to even be forced to do that. He's going to reduce it to a half an hour pretty soon. He's got so many things going, and it's so good, and I'm glad that every time when he reprints his paper, he puts a quote in there for me, telling how great the Japanese, how great the Nichi Bei is, and everything. And I still feel the same way. It's the biggest force that keeps the Japanese American community alive. Let's give him a standing ovation.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate you. Not only your friendship, what you've done for resistance. My father was a Nisei draft resistor, so it's really meaningful to me. But especially after my mentor Wei Maya passed away, and you came in and took over the responsibility of reviewing the majority of our history books. I can't thank you enough, and my closest advisor in all things Japanese American history. So glad that we could bring this book launch.
Can I say one thing about a forthcoming book of mine to look forward to? It's called Iconic Voices, and this is going to be the interviews I did with 13 people who became iconic figures with respect to the Japanese American World War II incarceration. One of whom is a negative icon, Lillian Baker. And I think I might have been the only person that ever interviewed Lillian Baker. And then she befriended me, for God's sakes. But in any event, I look for this book because it's not, none of the people none of the iconic figures that figure in my previous books are included in there, but there are 13 people who are very, very important to the Japanese American story and stuff. So that's one of the things that I want to do before I kick the bucket. So thanks a lot.
We love you, Art, and before we transition to the first film, I want to take a picture with you.
Okay.
And then after that, we'll leave the stage.
Luckily, she's short enough that I can sit down.